Grateful that we have Assistant Secretary of State Heaster with us today. I'm hearing a lot of questions and concerns about voting, and I keep hearing we need to make a plan, and I keep getting questions about what the church can and cannot do. And thanks to Pastor Sullivan, I realized I was answering that question wrong. So I'm excited to learn today, and we will be posting this to our YouTube page when we're done. So you can share it and invite other people to see it. And it's really important that we all vote. So Assistant Secretary of State, welcome. And I'm going to mute and turn it over to you.
It is, thank you so very much, Bishop Craig Satterlee. It is my pleasure, and thank you so much, Pastor Sullivan, for inviting me to be a part of such an important conversation. A lot of things are happening here in Michigan, and because of Michigan's new voting rights, a lot of people have questions and legitimate concerns. Jocelyn Benson, as our Secretary of State, she is just awesome in all of her dynamism. She cares deeply about democracy and voter participation. You'll hear me say some of this probably as we go through the PowerPoint, but we embarked upon several initiatives that require us reaching out. So we welcome the opportunity to be a part of these important conversations. Thank you so very much, Pastor Sullivan, for following up after our initial meeting. We've identified the 100 low-performing precincts across the state, for an example, and we determined that we would go to each of those communities and find out why people don't vote and see if there's a relationship between the number of conversations, the number of times we touch those voters, and the likelihood they participate. So we've learned quite a bit already in the last year. And the fact that we got no excuse absentee voting, same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, it does kind of require a plan that you think about it a little more thoughtfully. And in this COVID-19 environment, making a plan makes a lot more sense. So we anticipate 5.5 million Michigan voters will go to the poll or participate in this process. So let's go to the PowerPoint. Let me highlight some of the numbers that we put together, and then there are no sacred questions, sir. I know how sacred this experience is, but there are no sacred questions. Anything you want to ask, let's see if we can help you get to an answer. All right, so again, happy to be here, and then let's go to the very next one. All right, so COVID-19 and voting, we just want you to know that Michigan has some 1,500 plus clerks. We've sent a ton of PPE equipment, gloves, hand sanitizers, cleaning supplies to every clerk across this state. In fact, clerks have been particularly appreciative because we want to be as proactive as is humanly possible. And we want people to practice social distancing, as you referenced earlier, Bishop Satterlee. That is a big part of a solution. So ballot Dropboxes, they're not necessarily new, but they're kind of new to some of us in Michigan. Some clerks have always used them, but we looked at it at Utah, Oregon, Colorado. They have been the mainstay. We've tried to go into hyper overdrive here in Michigan to help people become familiar and start trusting these drop boxes. And many of you know the politics of the post office right now. We're saying outside of the mailbox, you have several ways to participate in this democracy experience. You can actually take advantage of these drop boxes. You can trust a mailbox, but we're saying if you get within 2 weeks of election day, take it directly to the clerk's office or trust one of these drop boxes that are frequently checked. Automatic letter openers we've sent to clerks because that speeds up the processing of ballots and envelope folders. We've made a lot of resources available. A lot of clerks, you can check with your local clerks to see if they've been able to sign up and take advantage of, financial resources. A lot of money flows in election seasons like this, as you might imagine. And the fact that Michigan is a battleground state, that's real. Lots of resources are here already. So stay tuned. Let's go to the next one, Chelsea. No excuse absentee voting, you heard me reference. That's huge. Same day voter registration. Let me talk to you a little bit. Michigan is no excuse absentee state. We're not a vote by mail state necessarily. A vote by mail state is distinguished and a couple of significant ways. If we were a vote by mail state, there would be no polling places, and everybody would participate by mail. That's a vote by mail state. The fact that you have to make application for an absentee ballot makes us a no excuse absentee state. And the fact that there are no more deadlines, you used to have to make application for an absentee ballot 30 days in advance. All of that goes away in a no excuse absentee voting. That's why the voting season started early, because you don't have to honor those deadlines anymore. Same day voter registration, this is huge. And I'll tell you why. We've already hosted 3 elections here in Michigan. March 10, you all remember the presidential primary. May 5, in some 50 plus communities, we had school board or school bond millage type questions in some select communities. And again, of course, most recently, August 4, over 18,000 people took advantage of same day voter registration. Over 50% were all under the age of 30. And hundreds of those same day voter registrants were in fact ages 18 and 19. So that informs us, that helps us to know that young people will participate, but they might not participate until the very, very last day. So I encourage all of you to keep your hand in the hearts and in the lives of young people, because they will participate. But there's a book, I'm probably not, I'll never be as smart as you, Bishop Satterlee, but I do read a lot, sir. And I've got this wonderful book on my shelf right here. It's called Scarcity. And Scarcity, the subtitle for Scarcity is Why Having So Little Means So Much. And I think you already know where I'm going. What that basically means is sometimes we do our best work when we're completely out of time. I know as I struggled through college, people thought I was brilliant on the day I had to make that 10-page paper presentation, but what they didn't know is I just put it together the night before. So sometimes I'm saying that same law is true in voting. A lot of folk won't make the decision to do something until they're completely out of time. So I'm encouraging you, keep pushing, particularly young people, up until the day of, when they have no excuses, no place to go. They will participate, but they might not participate until the very last moment. And then the third benefit of Proposal 3 from November of 2018 is automatic voter registration. That means every time you have an experience with the Michigan Secretary of State's office, we're going to automatically update your voter registration status unless you say otherwise. Next slide, please. We initiated a lot of different programs. You heard me talk about the 100 low performing precincts, but we also did, this was called Democracy MVP, be an MVP, most valuable player. We've been asking people all across the state, if you want to participate on election day, sign up through michigan.gov/democracy MVP. Guess what? Over 25,000 Michigan residents signed up to work on election day. That is awesome. We could not have anticipated that level of participation. So we've been asking clerks from around the state, if you needed poll workers, we've got a big pool. We've sent poll workers everywhere, from Sturgis, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Muskegon, all across Detroit, Flint. We've got poll workers or volunteers or people in the ready position to help on election day. In fact, we probably have way more people who have signed up than we will ever need, but we're going to try and find an opportunity for them to be useful anyway. It's a paid position. You do have to go through training, and we're asking for people to participate in significant ways, particularly in this COVID-19 experience. And honestly, not to be smudge or not to speak ill of people as we grow older, but in this COVID-19 environment, particularly in African-American, Black and brown communities, you need younger people to participate. They have a different kind of stamina. They say that, I know you can't look at me, Bishop, and know that I'm over 50, but the fact is I am over 50. So I'm probably in that group of folk who are, who live these compromised immune systems. But so we need people in their 20s and 30s to show up at the polls and participate in the process and exercise those good customer service skills, help people get through that experience. So let's go to the next one, Chelsea. Thank you. The Michigan, this is huge. So upon arrival, we looked across the state government experience. Jocelyn says, Heaster, and there are 12, 14 of us who work at the executive level. How can we impact this state? What can we do? How can we use our power? How can we use our authority 8 to 9,000 people come home from Michigan prisons every year. So we said, what does this slice of our community need? Most of them would leave Michigan prisons. They barely had an identification. They would have a Michigan Department of Corrections identification, but they didn't particularly want to use that. They all needed a driver's license or a state ID. So we, for the first time, I'm pleased to announce that we've entered into a relationship with the Department of Corrections. All 9,000 people that leave Michigan prisons will have either a driver's license, a state identification, and a voter registration card for the very first time in Michigan history. That's huge. That goes a long ways, and it helps in a lot of different ways. So that's what that slide is about. Let's go to the next one, Chelsea. I think that's most of the things I wanted to highlight early. I have to put Jocelyn's picture. She is such a dynamo. She runs. Have you guys met her by chance? Just has she been out? Yeah, we got to get her out there. But she is such a dynamo, so high energy. She actually jogs at least 3 miles every day. She does 2 or 3 marathons every year. I've been so inspired to work alongside of her. And because of COVID-19 and this compromised immune system and the fact that she was running 3 miles, we started in my neighborhood. We got a big park. We started what we call the Walking Brotherhood. There's about 8 of us. We meet every morning at 6:30, and we very deliberately walk 4 miles because I just want to be able to keep up with Jocelyn, who runs 3 miles. But that's just a reflection of her commitment to democracy and our commitment to get things done. So let's open this up, Chelsea. Any kinds of questions, there are no sacred anything. I just want to make sure we're touching up on every aspect of this voting experience.
So would you talk a little bit about what Christian congregations can and cannot do? I mean, I thought it'd be wonderful. You go and you get in your car and you go pick up all your older members' ballots and you take them. And I'm told I can't do that.
So there's a concept called harvesting, and that violates the law. If you live with a person, if you are related to a person, or if you are assigned by the clerk, you can collect ballots. Beyond that, it's called harvesting, and that violates the law. You can go into a senior facility and say, "Hey, everybody, you got your ballots complete? I will take you to the clerk and help you drop it off." You follow me?
Yep.
You cannot influence what you can't say, okay, everybody take your ballots out, let's go through the ballot. You just can't. You understand?
Yep.
What else are you thinking? Any other questions?
I'm going to ask my 3 questions and I'll be quiet.
That's okay.
When did they begin to count the ballots?
Very important question too, Bishop Satterlee. Right now, state law only allows that the ballots are counted or began to get counted on election day beginning at 7 a.m.
Okay.
We did get a piece of legislation out of Lansing that allows for the early processing of ballots, which is the day before, beginning at 10 a.m. through 8 p.m. It's very meticulous. It is very meticulous. There are so many layers to the voting experience, and most of us, we really, we don't vote every 2 weeks or every month. So it's not like you are intimately familiar with all the rules. So it's good that we have these kinds of conversations. In this COVID-19 environment, the fact is we will see more people participate via the absentee process than actual voting at the poll. So it takes a little longer to process an absentee ballot, because if you go to the poll, you put your ballot right into the machine and it's calculated immediately. But if 3 million ballots come through the absentee process, 2.5 million ballots happen on election day. That means starting at 7 a.m. on election day, you got to start processing and tabulating 3 million. It's going to take a little longer is the point. There's some 30 plus communities that have 3, 5, 7 days in advance. They can start processing their ballots. Michigan is a little conservative. So we've got work to do. We're going to need all of you as we implement this full court press once we get past this election season. We need to continue to move from worst to first. And these new voting rights allows us a positive movement in the right direction.
My last question, then I'll be quiet.
That's quite all right.
So I like to sit up late on election night and watch my favorite news commentator.
Yes, sir.
And by the time I go to bed, usually I know who the president is.
Yes, sir.
When do you think we'll know?
Well, on behalf of Jocelyn Benson, our Secretary of State, she says, don't anticipate the final numbers before Friday, November 6th. That's what she's saying very publicly. Now, honestly, there's a very good chance you'll see a pattern emerge before you go to bed on Tuesday night.
Right. Yeah.
You will see a pattern. You just won't get to the final ballots. You might say with 80% of the ballots counted or 65% of the ballots counted. This is the trend. There's a good, we've helped so many clerks put so many new high-speed tabulators. We've helped increase the training experience. We just don't want to declare prematurely. And there's an early indication, but you can't count your ballots. You can't get any declarations before, but there's an early indication that the distinction might be obvious very early.
Yeah.
But we don't know.
Right.
So I know that's not the best answer.
No, but it helps us all to know, I think, that we shouldn't get all worked up if we don't know Wednesday morning.
Yeah, so we're saying this is really not about election day anymore. This is an election season. And so, and it already started 40 days before election day. And we're saying November 3 is a part of election week. And you might not be exactly where you need to be before that Friday following election day. But we think based on all the things we've got so many motivated people who are making a difference. We've got clerks that are engaged. We've got faith leaders like you who are educating and reaching out. And helping make a difference across your respective communities. We think a lot of good things are going to come out of this, but there's always the possibility of human frailty and human error. And very often when there are challenges on election day, it comes down to maybe poor training or poor stamina. But I'm encouraged, even in Detroit and Flint and Grand Rapids and Pontiac, some of the larger communities, we have been engaged with many of these clerks and mayors and political leaders. Everybody is committed to getting this right.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
That's excellent.
Okay, so I guess if anyone else on the call has questions, if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you, or if you want to put it in the chat, I can read it out. Lynn, go ahead.
Thanks again for being with us and giving us some information. I'm in Battle Creek, Michigan, and I go to St. Peter Lutheran, and we're a polling place. And our city clerk has really searched out more churches for actually being polling places. We used to have a lot of schools, and that was always disruptive and things. So, but a couple of questions. One is how. I think there's a rule about being within 100 foot of a building for campaigning.
That's great.
But then I was reading something the other day, because we're tax exempt, that there's a danger even if there's any campaigning going on our property. So I guess my question is, to me, it sounds like there should be no campaigning on any church property.
Yeah, I honestly know that there is a tradition where churches have been polling places for years. So I don't know that if that particular rule applies in this circumstance. Churches, schools, community centers, recreation centers, I think once they have signed on as polling places, and there's a clear understanding of what your expectations are, then you don't necessarily need to separate the politics of election day. But there is a 100-foot rule. Nobody should be closer than 100 feet from the main entry to that polling place, which I've never seen that. I've never seen poll workers respect that. They get as close to the door so they can grab that voter at the very last minute as often as is humanly possible. But every now and then there are some people who say, I want to enforce the rules, and you can push those election day poll workers further away from the main door. let me say this to you also, Brother Lynn, since you brought it up. We got a particular problem this year, and I don't want to put extra emphasis, but I do want to just prick your consciousness. We've got all types of voter suppression. We've got all types of threats and intimidation going on this year. So don't be surprised if you see a different kind of element showing up on election day. We know it's going to happen in Detroit, but there's a different kind of element out there who represent a kind of political extremism and people who are unhappy, who are uncertain, and they will probably push for the rules to be strictly enforced. I can say this, the Attorney General, along with the Secretary yesterday, issued some guidance. There's no open carry, no weapons at inside polling places. Did you guys see that by chance?
I just got a memo from our city clerks yesterday,
Yes.
which I shared with our pastor and our chairperson of our board. And our thinking is, because of the ELCA's positions and maybe even Minton Synods position, we would very much support no weapons on our property.
That's correct. So the way the law is written currently, you're not allowed to open carry in a school building. And then typically the leader of a church facility determines if or not weapons can or cannot be carried. But we're saying because of the tension, the political tension in this moment, and because of things you've already seen, a lot of people have already been arrested. People have already been charged for engaging in extremists. You should pray for the best. Bishop, this is where we need you, sir. We need you. We need you more. Pastor Sullivan, we need you guys more now than ever. Pray for the best, but prepare for the worst, just in case. Just in case. So we're having a lot of conversations. We're not saying it very loud because sometimes people who live in the margins don't need much encouragement. So stay tuned.
Well, we do put up the 100-foot barrier, so to speak, but obviously that still leaves other parts of our property open to campaigning. And
Yes.
maybe it should be a synod issue or even a church issue. We ought to have our own little resolution that says no campaigning on church property.
Yeah, if it's a friendly political moment, and there's really no harm, if voters are not intimidated, or if voters don't feel harassed by poll workers, by volunteers on different political campaigns, rarely do you see strict enforcement. It's a case-by-case situation. But if you've got a very, very competitive race, you've got two campaigns that are shouting at each other or going into overdrive to influence a voter at the last moment, that's when you really have to, that's when you typically will see the rules being strictly enforced.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yep. Shearson?
Mr. Wheeler, can you, just because I think this is really cool, can you talk a little bit about like what actually happens and when a ballot goes in? Like what are some of the checks and balances that are in place to make sure people don't vote twice? And
yes. So if you drop your ballot into a Dropbox, for example, if you turn it in at the clerk, or even if it comes through the U.S. mail, upon arrival, the election inspectors, the people that work for the clerk, they are to reconcile that particular ballot with the poll book. That means, okay, we've received a ballot from Kristen Sullivan, so we'll check off that she's voted. If by chance Kristen Sullivan shows up at the poll, we say, oh no, we've already got record that you voted. You cannot vote a second time. But the clerk's office has some additional responsibility. As example, there were some 10,694 ballots that were not counted in the August 4 primary. Most of the public would never know that, but a lot of those were not counted because the ballots were not received by 8 p.m. on election night. But guess what? There were two other reasons the ballots were not counted. Sometimes the signatures did not match. So the clerk has some extra responsibility to engage in what we call signature curing. Sometimes as we get older, we get fancier, or we just maybe have medical challenges where your signature changes. The clerk has some extra responsibility to contact that voter to say, hey, your signatures are not matching. They don't line up with the signature that was on your voter registration application or on your driver's license, whichever is the signature. So clerks have some extra obligation to contact that voter. So those are some of the things that happen once your ballot gets in. If you have in fact filled in too many ovals, some people just maybe without thinking, they'll fill it in for the Libertarian, the Green Party, the Republican, and the Democrat, all running for the same position. That's overvoting. And believe it or not, there's always an element who just that will not regard the process. Say, I'm voting for everybody. You guys figure it out. So that ballot can be spoiled. Or if it says vote for 3 people and there are 7 people running and you vote for more than 3, then that slice of your ballot is spoiled. It doesn't necessarily spoil your entire ballot. And then there is an adjudication process, is what we call it. Typically, there are at least 3 people at each of what we call the counting tables. If you can analyze and figure out the intent of the voter, so maybe a voter comes in and they fill in the oval for Cheryl Satterlee, and they also fill in an oval for June Scarborough, and they're only supposed to vote for one, but maybe they erase one or put an X through and say, oh, no, I really meant to vote for that person. If those 3 people at the counting board can make a determination that this was the intent of the voter, then that ballot can go through and be processed also. But that's stuff that happens behind the scene. Most of the public would never know that, Pastor Sullivan. Does that get to your question?
Yeah, I just think all of those, like, I had a friend ask me the other day, well, what happens if, I turn in my absentee ballot and then I go into the polls? And so I think, like, we don't always think about all the processes that you all have in place.
Yes. Well, once that first ballot, and let me tell you this, it is happening already because we put so much emphasis on make a plan, vote early. People are anxious. Voters, in fact, I don't know if I said this earlier, but 1 million plus Michigan voters have already sent their ballots in, 1 million plus. And that's a reflection of the fact that people are anxious. People want to get this thing over with. They want to get it done. And so a lot of people they've made application for their absentee ballots, but they didn't wait for their absentee ballot to arrive in the mail. They went to the clerk's office anyway. And so technically the clerk should allow you to vote at their office. And once you voted, again, behind the scenes, we will make notation in the electronic poll book that Kirsten Sullivan's already been here. She's voted. And then when you get home and within 2 or 3 days, if your ballot comes in the mail, technically you can trash it, or some people out of goodwill will take it to the clerk's office. Or if some people forget and they show up on election day anyway, and that poll worker will say, no, Ms. Sullivan, we have record that you've already voted. So it's very difficult to cheat. I'm not saying it's conscious or it's very difficult to vote a second time or make that mistake.
Well, the only one thing that I did hear was somebody from another state who I believe had a residency in another state,
Yes.
asked to register in the state of Michigan to vote. Can that be done? And how is that checked?
So say somebody had a residency in Florida.
Yes.
And really it comes down to your driver's license for one. So you cannot have a driver's license in 2 states, or your formal photo identification. You cannot have driver's licenses in 2 states. So I don't know if a Florida resident would have the credentials necessary to qualify for a Michigan ballot. And if you go to michigan.gov/vote, you will see what's required to make application for a ballot, and a driver's license is typically one of them. So that's one way to reconcile. I'm sure there is some occasion where something might get through. But I was looking at election fraud and the allegations of election fraud and evidence of election fraud, but it's probably, the numbers were so obscure. It was like maybe 180 out of 100,000. There have been some situation where a person made an effort to vote a second time, but it's not, it's not the kind of problem people talk about in search of a solution. It's really manufactured that happens. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah. So that driver's license is key.
Any last questions? Oh, Bishop?
I will say thank you. Would be okay if we pray.
It's always okay to pray.
All right, let us pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks that you work through our democratic process to promote the common good. We ask you to bless our pending election, to guard those who will come to vote, and to guide and sustain our Secretary of State's office, our county clerks, our town clerks, our poll workers, and all who will care for this election. Sustain them. Give them hope and vision for the profound work they do. We ask this in your most sacred name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for being with us, sir.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate the invitation. Happy to participate. Don't hesitate. Call upon us when you need to.